Hey guys, I hope everybody's doing well today. Happy holidays to all of you. I wanted to do what I think is going to be a relatively quick video here, but I thought it might be useful to add to the conversation about Path of Exile 2 a little bit of the perspective of a more casual player. So I guess I should probably give you a little bit of my background. So when it comes to ARPGs, and I'm a gamer who plays a wide range of different types of games. I actually tend to lean more towards strategy games, but I like the ARPGs when every once in a while when I feel like just having a chill experience, or some of my friends and I, we decide to do a little bit of co-op or something like that. And I have played Path of Exile for a bit. I played Grim Dawn. I played Diablo. I've played Last Epoch. And I will go ahead and immediately say Path of Exile 2, I think, is an absolutely excellent game. I should at least say it's an excellent start of a game. Obviously, there's a lot more to come. I think it's already a really good game, and I think it's going to continue to improve, obviously, as they introduce more stuff to it. But in terms of the videos, I know that there's a lot of what I'm going to refer to as your professional PoE players who have given their really solid analysis on the current state of the game, what's good with it, what's wrong with it. I don't think I can improve upon the level of nuance that they, and full context, very detailed in-game discussions and things like that, that they add to the conversation. I most recently watched one just earlier today by Subtractum. I will go ahead and put a link to his video in the description to this one. I highly recommend it to anybody. I think he makes a lot of really, really incredibly good points, and I think it's consistent with what most of the others have had to say. I just think that he does a really effective job of presenting his information. But again, these are people who are coming from PoE 1, and they were what I'm going to call the top of the top, the cream of the crop in terms of PoE 1. And I'm not going to repeat what he has to say, other than to just say that one of his conclusions was he hopes PoE 2 doesn't just turn into PoE 1.5, and as they hear the complaints and they start to make revisions during this early access period, that it's going to turn into more and more of the types of mechanics and decision making that we saw in PoE 1. And I have to totally agree with him. I second what he said, because I do like the thought of PoE 2 kind of offering a slightly different, not entirely different, but a slightly different experience for gamers. So PoE 1 is a game that I played a lot over the last couple of years and really enjoyed the heck out of it until I got to the point where I realized, you know what, I'm never going to be the type of player who devotes enough time to this game to get really, really good at it. And you have to be really, really good at it. You have to really follow other people's build guides, unless you're the type of spreadsheet numbers cruncher person who wants to completely come up with your own build. But others have kind of paved the way, and so build guides are really the way to go to become a really good PoE player and achieve the ultimate end game experience. And that's not really what appeals to me. I like playing these ARPGs, and in fact, most games that allow you for some kind of buildcraft. I like playing these games for buildcraft. So I know I'm coming at this as a casual player. And so I'm kind of approaching this video as, what does PoE 2 offer for a more casual gamer who is going to play, a little bit, when they have the time to do it. Maybe they're going to mix it in with other games. Maybe they're going to play it with friends every once in a while, but they're not going to be able to or want to devote all the time that it takes to be really, part of the top tier players. Is PoE 2, I might start calling it Path 2. I'll go back and forth between those two terms. But anyway, is Path 2 a good game for those players like me? And I think the question is, or I think the answer is yes. I think that it is a good game, although I have some concerns about it. So the short answer, the TLDR, is yes, it is still a good game. There's a lot of fun to be had from a casual gamer. The longer answer is that I have concerns that might be maybe perhaps even increasingly less true moving forward. And even if they don't change the basic experience for casual gamers that you have right now, I'm a little bit, there are some existing concerns that I have as well. So I wanted to mention those, but I did definitely want to preface with saying I think it's a really excellent game. I think that the points of view of the professional Path of Exile players are all perfectly valid. I think that they could criticize the end-game experience far more capably than I personally would be able to. But I do think that I can represent a more casual perspective on this game. Somebody who is considering playing it, but they've heard about Path 1 and about how basically inaccessible it is if you want to be able to go through all the content in the game. And I'm not specifically talking about the passive skill tree. I actually love the passive skill tree in both Path 1 and Path 2. I love looking at that and just this is what I like about the buildcraft. You just get all kinds of ideas about, possibilities, coming up with off-meta builds that not everybody else is using, but you can still, have a really fun time with. I love having that opportunity, and I think this really what at first glance appears to be an incredibly complicated passive skill tree allows you to do is it's really not all that complicated once you kind of dig into it a little bit. So that's not really what I'm referring to. There's a learning curve, obviously, with these games, and obviously the learning curve with Path 2 is a little bit harder because you start fighting some really tough things almost right away in this game. I like that. I'm perfectly fine with it. I hope that they don't make it harder from a big picture perspective. However, having said that, I've noticed a tremendously different experience depending on which class I am playing. So I've got here in the background some footage of a couple of different characters that I've been playing through. I've been playing through the campaign with each of the different classes. What I've experienced, and obviously it stands to reason I might be better at some of the classes than I am at others, and I also don't use build guides, so I'm kind of trying to figure these things out on my own, on the fly. But that's kind of my point of this video is, is the game accessible to somebody who wants to do that? Is the game accessible to somebody who doesn't want to have to watch a build guide video and play it the way that others have already, the trail that others have already blazed? And the answer right now, I think, is yes. I think there's still a lot of fun to be had in this game. But I've noticed a somewhat variable experience in terms of what the different classes have encountered. I'm just going to give one example, but there's others as well. When you get to the Trader Balbala in the second act, which obviously you need to do to unlock your ascendancy, I killed Balbala on the first try with sort of a necromancer-ish witch using SRS, or I guess it's just RS in this particular game. But anyway, that build felt kind of like easy mode, and I got through that stage. And then the second character that I got up to that point was a lightning-based monk, and just completely radically different experience. It's just a boss teleporting around every couple of seconds, constantly dropping different types of attacks on you. There are different attacks that are telegraphed, but it ends up being a bit of an exercise in frustration, dying over and over again to just try to learn all the crazy different ways that this boss behaves. I had a somewhat similar experience, although not nearly as bad, with the King in the Mists. And again, I don't have a problem with there being difficult bosses. I think that that's actually the way that it should be. There should certainly be some real challenges. I think that there could just be a little bit of fine-tuning there in terms of the radically different experience that a melee-based character is going to have going up against some of these bosses that are just constantly teleporting all over the screen, filling up your screen with different types of AoE effects that you have to avoid as you're trying to chase after them. It's ranged combat has often felt quite exciting and rewarding, and melee combat has quite often felt a little bit more, I don't even want to say punishing, I just want to say frustrating. And it's okay, like I said, that some bosses are more difficult than others, but the frustrating experience is if I'm experiencing it, and I don't consider myself to be a great player by any stretch, but I consider myself to be a decent player. I think I'm probably fairly representative of your typical casual player who comes in and has, some experience with ARPGs but isn't an expert. And I think others will experience the same thing that I did. So, tiny little bit of a side note there in terms of some classes provide a better, less frustrating experience than others. Having said that, I'm still fine with it. Again, this is early access, and I think that they're probably open to feedback, and we'll make some fine-tuning adjustments. I am going to throw out one additional thing here when we're talking about the difficulty, however, and I have a feeling this is probably heresy, and if I deserve to be flamed for even suggesting the idea of this, then go ahead. I feel like I'm somewhat reluctant to even mention it because I feel like I'm maybe crossing a line here. But anyway, I'm curious what the response is going to be. There's no difficulty setting in this game, and I'm a little curious. Path of Exile was the same way. Technically, there are sort of difficulty settings in PoE 1. If you wanted to play Ruthless mode, for example, it's a little bit more difficult, but it's more in terms of item scarcity as opposed to the difficulty of fighting the enemies, although they do end up becoming more difficult because you don't have access to all the support gems, for example. But anyway, long story short, yeah, there are slight tweaks in your difficulty if you wanted to play hardcore versus softcore or SSF versus trade. Little things like that. I don't know if GGG is actually planning to introduce a Ruthless mode in this. I'm kind of assuming not, but I don't know that for sure. But anyway, yeah, I mean, there are other games that... Okay, let me back up a step. So there are going to be your really elite players who want to continue to have a challenge. And then there are also going to be casual players who want to have fun in the game and like a challenge, but it's frustrating to have happen in PoE 2, the same thing that happened in PoE 1, which is a casual player can enjoy it for a little while and then realize all of a sudden, wait a minute, if I want to experience, beyond the early end game, beyond the early mapping, from everything that I'm hearing, it's just going to be incredibly difficult, and I have to be, my character has to be supercharged. I can't make any mistakes, or I lose my map. Things that are truly punishing, that are perhaps appropriately challenged for elite players, I think is going to drive a fair number of casual players away. It probably will drive me away once I get to the point where I feel like, okay, the marginal rewards in terms of fun that I'm experiencing in the game are not worth the extra time that I would have to devote to it. And I think that happens in a lot of games for, a lot of players. They basically play into it until they start to realize, okay, I just don't want to devote, or I can't devote all the time it's going to take to squeeze out the last little bit of fun out of this game that it provides. So hopefully that makes sense. But anyway, going back to GGG's decision, I'm assuming they have a vision for this game, and that vision includes who do we want to appeal to, what do we want to be our priority in terms of providing a good gaming experience for casual players versus elite players. And obviously, it's not binary. You're not one or the other. There's a whole wide range of people in between. But hopefully the concept at least is simple to understand. Do they want to appeal to casuals who like to mess around with the build craft, like to come up with their own ideas for a character? So for example, I had the idea of just playing some dual wield builds, which I hadn't seen a whole lot of from different content creators. Now granted, I don't go out looking at build guides, but I saw a fair number of repetition in terms of your lightning-based, monks and your infernalists, particularly your minion builds. There's others that seem to be sort of your archetypical build guides that are really popular, and many of them are sort of very similar to the ones that you had in PoE 1. But what appeals to me is to go, you know what, I want to see if I can make a dual wield build work. So I made a warrior, and I started messing around with the warrior as a dual wield, and then I just wanted to see how the warrior compared as a dual wield build to a mercenary. So here I am playing a mercenary as a dual wielder instead of using the crossbow. And I know these things are viable in the early game. In fact, I've had one of the easiest times with this mercenary who's a dual wielder, compared to any of the other characters. Part of it's because I've gotten better as a player. Part of it's because I know the boss and the monster mechanics better and things like that. But in any case, you can make these sort of, just spontaneous decision type builds work in the early game. But we all know that the formula in Path 1 and probably in Path 2 as well is if you want to get very far into the game, particularly into the end game, into mapping, then it's not going to work anymore. You're going to have a hard time finding much success with, just sort of your spontaneous trying new things type builds. Now, that is obviously the way that people come up with new build guides, but these are the people who have lots and lots of time to devote to it, understand the mechanics of the game at a super deep level, and already have a really good idea of what they're doing from the get-go, which again is not the definition of a casual gamer. So that's really all I'm throwing out there when it comes to sort of the difficulty in this game and just the curiosity why GGG doesn't seem to have considered an option to give more experienced, more elite players a higher difficulty setting to play on. And I realize that there are absolutely trade-offs associated with that, but it's a non-competitive game. This is, for the most part, a single-player game. People are competitive with each other in terms of the leaderboards, but it's not competitive in the terms of, a multiplayer competition where you're fighting each other or anything like that. And so I don't really get the need to have a level playing field in terms of a difficulty setting if people aren't truly in competition with each other. So maybe somebody knows the whole rationale behind why there's no difficulty setting in these two games, and it probably would make perfect sense, but I've never heard it. I think then that's probably the main things that I wanted to mention. I feel like the content is going to come naturally. I'm not really so much worried about, obviously there's a lot of weapons that haven't been introduced into the game. There's a lot of classes that haven't been introduced to the game. The passive skill tree, obviously now having 12 classes, or ultimately it will have 12 classes instead of the 6 to 7 that you had in Path 1. It's going to become a whole lot more jumbled, and I guess that's why they made the decision to actually have a different looking passive skill tree depending on what your starting class is. I feel like there's some trade-offs associated with that decision, but I can kind of understand why they went with it. It feels a little weird coming from Path 1 and thinking about how cool it is to be able to create a, let's say, you create a Marauder, but you really want to make them more of a magic base. There's nothing stopping you from doing it, or a dex base, so you want to, plow your way through the passive skill tree over towards where the witch was, or over towards where the ranger was, or something like that. You can still do that in this game, but it's a little bit different because some of the nodes will never appear for you because they are they're tied to a specific class. It's a pretty minor deal. It was just a little jarring when I first found out about that. I feel like the combat feels really good. I feel like the graphics are quite good. Really like the story of the campaign. There's absolutely a lot going for this game. I'm going to compare it to Last Epoch, and I got criticized quite heavily, and I learned an important lesson as a content creator that if you dare make a video that criticizes games, be prepared for a lot of people to say a lot of bad things about you and your ideas. And so I get that, but I'm going to go ahead and make the comparison anyway because I think it's a legitimate one. I think Last Epoch is a game that's fun for a short period of time. It does a lot of the big things correctly. I think that there's excellent crafting in that game. I think the build craft in that game is really good. I think it's a much more accessible game for a casual. I think the story is very mediocre at best, and I think the storytelling, which is to say the story is one thing, but the way the story is told is probably the worst I've seen of any game in a long time. Just absolutely terrible storytelling, bad voice acting, bad writing, things like that. And there's other little kind of unpolished aspects of Last Epoch that, to me, hold it back. I feel like it's a game that does the big things really well, and it just ignores too many of the little things. For me, again, it's highly subjective. I think in contrast to that, I think Path of Exile 2 excels at just about everything. The story's great, the voice acting's great, the storytelling is good, the combat is really fluid. There's obviously big gaps in the content that are missing that show up every now and again, but there's really very little for me to complain about from any of those standpoints. I just kind of worry that this is going to ultimately be this game that is excellent in so many ways, and it's just going to become another experience like Path 1 did, where it's going to be, all right, I think I've probably gotten all the fun out of it that I could get with a reasonable time investment, and I'm going to end up stopping short of experiencing a lot of the end game content because I just don't want to follow build guides. I don't want to just have nothing but endless frustration, and I don't have the time to devote to being the super elite, the cream of the crop type Path players. So hoping it doesn't go there. It hasn't really gotten to that point for me yet. I guess largely a lot of this is coming from the concerns that I've heard that other people have voiced, the other frustrations that some of the others have voiced. So anyway, just like I said, a casual player's perspective on the game, not in any way trying to discount anything that the more elite players have had to say, because like I said, they could do a far better job at criticizing the nuance of the end game, for example, than I would be able to. But I do think that my perspective represents that of a lot of potentially new players who have heard really good. In fact, I have friends who this is the first ARPG that they've ever played, or that they've played since Diablo 2. And so, they love it, what they're seeing so far. And it's kind of like, I'm glad they love it. I'm having a good time playing co-op with them. I'm a little bit more further along the learning curve than they are, but they'll catch up to me pretty quickly. I think we're having fun playing it together. I don't want that experience to end because all of a sudden they realize, oh, I see. That's how it's going to be. The campaign is really the only part of the game that we're going to want to play, because this end game is really more for your complete tryhards, and that's not us. So I'm hoping the game doesn't end up in that category. I'm hoping they clean up a little bit of the fine tuning between the different classes, because I would like for it to be a fun but challenging experience through the campaign for every class. And I do feel like currently some of them blast through the campaign, and others are just quite a bit more frustrating. At least at my skill level. Okay, anyway, I think I'll go ahead and wrap things up there. I'm curious what other people think. Particularly curious of other people who are not committed Path of Exile players, but have played this Path of Exile 2 a little bit, or Path of Exile 1 a little bit as well. I'd love to hear what other more casual players have to say about it, because the main thing that I hear over and over again is how complicated the passive skill tree is, and I really don't think that's the detriment to playing either one of these games. But I do think that there are other things that can be turnoffs, not necessarily always will be, but can be turnoffs to more casual players. So particularly interested in hearing some feedback along those lines. And I'm not going to say Diablo 4 sucks, but I do think that that Path of Exile is a better game than Diablo. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. All right, anyway, hope it makes sense. Again, welcome your feedback. Thanks, everybody, for watching and listening, and I will see you all in the next video.